Thank you very much, Wade. Suffice it to say, you did your homework, as you would expect a lawyer to do, but suffice it to say that if you knew the rest of the Gorilla Mask story, that if it happened today, I'd be in prison. You couldn't get away with what I did that time, but it's a pleasure to be here, and Wade and I do go back to undergraduate days at OSU, and I couldn't help but think last night as I was putting my final notes together that who would have ever thought that he'd be the first gentleman and that I would be speaking to 300 doctors. I mean, that's just almost inconceivable. I want to thank Sandy, Dr. Sandbar, for the opportunity to address you. I like to have fun, so I asked Dr. Sandbar if it would be all right to share a joke, because I don't really know. You know, when I go to see the doctor, it's kind of a puckered up situation, and you guys aren't a lot of fun to be around, but he said no. He said, that'd be pretty good. And I said, well, would it be okay if I told a doctor joke? Well, he seemed a little nervous about that, so I said, well, how about if I tell a lawyer joke? And that seemed to make him more nervous because I found out he's a lawyer too. So, but it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to speak with you. But I want to get serious because I come to you today as a prosecutor. That's what the bigger portion of my career has been as a lawyer, as a prosecutor. As Wade told you, I was a 4-term DA, and those were some of the happiest years of my life. Really enjoyed that. I tried a lot of cases, got to try murder cases and rape cases and drug trafficking cases, and even tried to, in fact, the very first case I tried as a DA in 1996 was a DUI, so I did it all. Really enjoyed that time. During that time, we formed a drug task force under our office from 1997 until 2009. We shut it down. But we literally made thousands of arrests over that time period. We put hundreds of people in prison, and we took a lot of drugs off the street. And interestingly, towards the end of the life of that task force, we started seeing more of pain medication show up in our investigations and prosecutions. So I wanted to just kind of let you know the background that I come to you with, because we're all very much aware of the seriousness of the abuse as well as the illegal use of pain medication. And my question would be, are abuse and illegal use of pain medication becoming pandemic problems? It affects everyone, and I learned that very early in my prosecutorial years, that not a family really is immune from having some problems, whether it be methamphetamine, which is not what we're talking about today, but obviously pain medication. No family seems to be immune from the problem, and I don't really know whether it's becoming a pandemic, but the attention that I believe is being drawn to it by the media and the number of cases filed and the people affected seem to indicate to me that it is. And you guys would be, you know, in the trenches that probably hold the answers to that question. You would know probably better than anybody. But I realize that the abuse and illegal use of pain medication is not new. It's been around as long as it's been available, but we must agree, I believe, that it has surfaced as a societal issue. I think it's safe to say that more and more attention will be paid to it in the future. And I realize that a few years ago when I was DA, something you may not be aware of is that any time that somebody dies in an unattended situation, an autopsy is done and is forwarded to the DA. So I would receive autopsy reports for any unattended death that occurred in my district. And I would receive anywhere from 3 to 5 a month for the 2 counties that I represented, Payne and Logan counties. And a couple years ago, I became concerned because there seemed to be almost an exponential growth in the number of deaths that seemed to be attributable to overdose of pain medication, whether it be OxyContin, oxycodone. Certainly we had our share of methamphetamine, but these drugs started showing up in the cause of death. And here is one that I received shortly before I left the DA's office. I've obliterated the name, and you can't see it, but up close you could see, and I've highlighted it here, the probable cause of death with this lady was acute hydrocodone, oxycodone, and methamphetamine toxicity. And so I started becoming frightened, in a sense, because of the number of those that I was seeing, and it really just couldn't go unnoticed. We had, I'd seen, from day one, I'd seen overdoses of methadone. I'd seen that. That's been around for quite a while, but you didn't see these type of causes of death affixed to the autopsy reports very much. So I realized that what we started seeing grow up out of the ground, so to speak, is a problem. And here's an example of that autopsy report. And I want to tell you about a few cases that I prosecuted or that I'm aware of to emphasize this, and then I'll try to make it a little bit more poignant to you. Probably many of you would recognize this man. This was a sad day for me as DA. This is former OSU basketball coach Sean Sutton. Sean and I were, and I hope still are, friends. In fact, for many years I had his jersey in a frame in my office. And I took it down, not because of this case, actually before this case, because I had people accusing me of showing preferential treatment to OSU basketball players, so I removed the jersey. But this was a very sad day, and I think probably most of you are familiar with this case. I had the unfortunate obligation and duty as a part of my job as DA to file a multiple-count felony drug case against Sean, and the case involved his felonious possession and obtaining of prescription pain medication. He was doctor shopping, not only here in Oklahoma, but clear to Utah, where he had been assigned to a drug rehab situation. But he was found with OxyContin on his person and Adderall and I can't pronounce a lot of the terms you guys just let flow out of your mouth. Clonazepam, is that how you say it? But you probably remember how that case went. Fortunately, this very sad, and prosecutors do have hearts. We hate to see people broken. Certainly, we try not to get angry at people that commit crimes and prosecute them from that standpoint. But when you get into situations like this with addiction and those kind of things, and Sean had a lot at stake, obviously, as a married man with children and his career on the rocks, and so fortunately, this very sad case, at least so far, has a pretty good ending. He has he doesn't show up in an autopsy report, but more than that, he's fulfilled his obligations to the court and seems to have gotten himself back on his feet. He, as probably many of you know, is assisting his brother at Oral Roberts in Tulsa at one time as a consulting position. I believe he's actually now maybe on staff. But I wish Sean the best. But it affects everybody, or it can affect everybody. He pled guilty to those charges. I respected him for being man enough to admit his problem. On the 12-step program, he started out at about step 3. So, I admire Sean for having done that. But that was a hard day for me to see a man broken like that, particularly somebody that I respected. I used to tell people in audiences, I'm a huge OSU basketball fan, and I believe that of all the point guards that ever went through OSU, he got more out of what God gave him than any man I'd ever seen. He was just a very average athlete, but he was sure fun to watch. So that was tough. But it really brought home to me how serious this problem is. Another case that I want to tell you about that really hit close to home involved the best narcotics officer, the best agent, the best investigator I ever worked with. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, but it's the truth, and it happened that way. But he was a deputy sheriff in Payne County, had been assigned to my drug task force, and he was the best of all times. He's the guy that we see on TV that goes undercover. He was amazing, and he would almost run circles around the rest of my agents and investigators, and it was amazing how many cases he made. And I like to almost live vicariously through him. I love to read his reports because it was better than any John Grisham or, mystery writer you've ever seen, except it was real. Well, Brooke injured his knee when he was executing a search warrant and was arresting a suspect, and it was so badly wrenched that he had to have surgery, not once but twice. And during that time, he got addicted to Lortab and, I believe, would it be OxyContin or oxycodone? Could it be either, maybe? But same thing? Okay. But unbeknownst to me, the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics had become concerned because he was also at that time chasing the biggest pill pusher in Payne and Logan, actually in the central part of the state, north of Oklahoma City. And so they had their own intel working, and they thought that he might be dirty. And what was happening is, as he would work a case, or he would siphon off a few of those pills for himself. He was still, in my mind, and still to this day, is the most pure law enforcement officer I was ever around. But he hates the bad guys more than anybody. He never made a penny. He never sold any of it. But obviously what he did was illegal, and they came to me one day. I'll never forget when Darrell Weaver called me and said, and I think, Darrell, is he going to speak with you later this afternoon? That was one of the dark days in my days as a DA, to see one of the best officers, and he had a chance. Either he's going to fall on the sword or we're going to prosecute him and he's going to go to prison. He ultimately did the right thing. He pled to felony charges, and today he's changing oil on cars in the garage. And, what a horrible waste. But that really brought it home to me about, how bad this issue is. I suppose, you look at these two stories and you think, well, where does this fit in for us as physicians, doctors? Where do I fit into these stories? Well, maybe not so much in the two that I've just shared with you, because you really didn't have your fingerprints on any of those in any shape, form, or fashion. But other than potentially being victims yourself of Sean and his doctor shopping that went on. But this is a problem that does come close to home, and I didn't get a chance to vet this issue as much as I wanted to find out. I hope I don't offend anybody here. I hope there are no relatives in the audience, but this case, and you probably can't see it, but this is an article out of the Tulsa World of a physician that we prosecuted out of the AG's office last summer in Tulsa. This is Dr. David, and C-R-A-S-S, Cross, I don't know how you pronounce it, but we filed charges against him in 2008 for prescribing medications that, and as the pleadings read, not in good faith and outside the course of professional practice. He had a pain management practice. Dr. Crass had a psychiatric practice there. I think it was on South Boston in Tulsa. And he was prescribing Xanax and Valium and Lortab, Adderall, without a sufficient medical basis to show that those were needed. The case was tried to a jury. I don't know how many of you remember reading or hearing about it. Did anybody? That's interesting. That is fascinating. You guys work way too hard. I don't like to read the paper either. It's kind of depressing. But this article was the one that was in the Tulsa World this past August 31st, in fact. But the jury came back and found him guilty of 23 counts of distributing CDS, controlled dangerous substance, and fined him $700,000. He's a convicted felon. The jury did not recommend that he go to prison, but he then lost his medical license in last month in January. This was a case where, and I can tell you, because I not only I didn't try the case, but I was very involved in the strategy utilized in our presentation of the case and whether or not we were going to cut a deal. And so I know some of the facts here, and I can tell you that this is a case that I have total confidence that law enforcement wasn't after Dr. Crass because they didn't like him or that they were going to frame him or make an example out of him. He also was charged with workers' comp fraud, Medicaid fraud, and he was found guilty on that charge as well. In fact, that's actually what got our toe in the water on that case, was looking into that. but he was clearly a pill pusher operating, if you can operate in Oklahoma, a pill mill. I guess in Oklahoma that's probably not a good phrase because you can't distribute that medication from your office, I think is the status of our law. But his action or his failure to practice legitimate medicine, this is the part that got my attention. When they briefed me on the case, because it had been pending since '08, and bear in mind I was still prosecuting criminals in Payne and Logan counties at that time, but when they briefed me in early 2011 about what was going on in this case, it was almost a side note that the prosecutor that had worked the case up with the investigator said, and by the way, we know of at least 3 deaths that are attributable to his prescription overdoses that occurred to at least 3 people that they were receiving medication from him. So that really changed my view about what we should do or not do in that case. I don't know how many of you saw this article in yesterday's paper. It was in the Oklahoman, and some of you may have seen it, but it describes about the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA's, efforts in Florida. And it describes how that they have been, and they do have, or did have until the law changed recently, a pill mill opportunity there where the narcotics could be just prescribed and delivered right out of the physician's office. But I'd ask you, we won't have time today because of time constraints, but look at yesterday's Oklahoma and pull it up and read this article. It's pretty fascinating. In fact, I will read a couple paragraphs that I thought were interesting. I brought this with me, and it said, oxycodone has become the leading cause of drug overdoses in Florida, contributing to more than 1,500 deaths in 2010, records show. Over the past year, the DEA has increased the pressure on pain clinics with a series of undercover investigations leading to indictments of dozens of doctors and clinic owners around the state. Many more doctors have been forced to surrender their DEA licenses to write prescriptions. And what was interesting was at the beginning of the article it talked about what the change in law and also their presence and the undercover operations they've had this past year down there have done. It says the number of oxycodone pills sold by Florida doctors dropped dramatically in 2011 following a series of high-profile arrests and legislative crackdown on the storefront pill mills that made South Florida the hub of the nationwide black market in prescription painkillers. And it went down, this is the part I should have underlined that I didn't, sales of oxycodone from doctors' offices and pain clinics dropped 97% in 2010 to 2011. So that tells you what was going on. And I don't think, we don't have that going on in Oklahoma. And that's part of the message that I want to deliver to you today. I think it's safe to say that you don't need to be looking over your shoulder. That is not present in Oklahoma that law enforcement is aware of. But in fact, I'll tell you that in the 15-plus years that I prosecuted in Payne and Logan counties and had a drug task force, one of the more prolific drug task forces in the state, our stats were just always incredible. And that was because of the way we had it organized. Instead of going by hiring rogue agents, we would use existing officers in the Stillwater Police Department, Logan County Sheriff's Department, because they knew the community, but never prosecuted a doctor. And there are a lot of doctors in Payne and Logan counties. And those aren't our targets. However, there was a doctor in Stillwater that we were suspicious had gotten very close to the edge. If Daryl isn't here, is he? He'll be here later, but he'd know exactly who I'm talking about by even mentioning it. But if there was probably somebody that needed to be prosecuted, it's him or her. How about that? But in any event, I just throw that out as an example. We don't put a big target on you guys and probably give you as much girth or latitude that you would hope would be there. So what's the message that I bring today on behalf of law enforcement to physicians who prescribe pain medication? And I assume in some respects all of you do that. Whether you do that as the major part of your practice, only you would know. But I guess the message that I would bring to you is, and I apologize for ending on a kind of a sour or sad or down note, but go practice medicine, but please do it in the confines of accepted professional principles and practices. I guess I said it there. Physicians have nothing to worry about or fear from law enforcement if they're practicing within the boundaries of accepted professional principles and practices. But be aware, I think the warning shot has been fired, for example, like in Florida, is that it's coming. There will be more attention paid to this just because of the sheer numbers of deaths that are as a result of overdoses of these. So with that, I was going to try to stay on my schedule, and I want to do that and honor that, and I'll be happy to stick around, and if you want to visit with me at break, or if you have a question, or I might want to run as fast as I can, I don't know, but you can reach me if we miss each other at the Office of Attorney General. I want to put out a plug for Attorney General Pruitt. He is, even though he's not been in law enforcement, I told him the other day, I said, you should have been a prosecutor because that's the way you think. But I appreciate him giving me the opportunity to come speak to you. He's doing a good job to represent the state of Oklahoma and its people. And I will tell you, just so you'll know, that one of the things that he really wants to do is enhance his efforts on fraud, whether it be in Medicaid, or workers' comp or insurance fraud, and we're beefing up the Army for that, and we brought on more investigators to do that. So we hope you guys police your own industry well, but be advised we are there, but we're not looking to come round up a bunch of doctors. So with that, thank you for your time.